I think I know everybody here. I'm Pat. And I work with Brian and Roscoe. And we work for something called the Niagara Global Tourism Institute. We have 4 things that we do. One of them is foster entrepreneurship in this building we call Trek. And Katie's here. Well, maybe ask her about branding because everybody just knows us as Trek now. Nobody knows about the other things we do. But I'm going to tell you because I'm tired of people not knowing the other things we do. We have 4 pillars. One of them is research. So we do tourism-based research. And we also have a technology pillar, so we install Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi for tourists in downtown Niagara Falls. Tourists used to come here and turn their phones off because they didn't want to pay international roaming charges. Even Americans would turn their phones off because we tend to bounce off Canadian towers and get roaming bills even though you're not roaming. So we thought Wi-Fi was a pretty important thing to have for tourists. And we installed that luckily the year before the pandemic. So we did get some. The other thing we get is data, which we can use on the research side. The data's been pretty thin the last 2 years, but we did get some interesting information about who our visitors are using our Wi-Fi beacons. We do workforce. Roscoe's really our expert in workforce development. We run 3 different programs at least. One of them is for front desk clerks. We give them sales tips and techniques so that during the winter they can convince people to stay another night. And if they do, they fill out a card, and we pick out a card every month. And the card whose name is on this card that we pick out, we win $250. So turns out the $250 is motivating for front desk clerks. So during the winter, they ask people, "Would you like to stay another night?" I'll tell you what we have here. And a lot of the venues that we use to convince people to stay another night are in Buffalo. I think 14 of the 16, 17 venues we have are in Buffalo. It's places like Science Center, Teddy Roosevelt site, Pierce Arrow Museum, Albright Rental, Richfield Penny. Because we don't have enough to do with the next year, so we're working on that. And we run a program for people that are chronically unemployed, many of them homeless, give them entry-level skills, sales, life skills, so that they can get a job, but more importantly, keep it and get promoted. Because they're going to get an entry-level job in the hospitality sector, and you don't necessarily want to create a whole bunch of entry-level jobs for people to raise a family on and want to advance. So that program has been a big, big success. What else? We got another program I run. Workforce.
Oh, we're starting a program with the Field and Fort Network in January in regards to the food systems. Niagara Falls is considered a food desert, so it's part of the Niagara Falls Local Food Action Plan. We're working with Niagara Falls high school seniors to help them learn more about the food systems and obviously the careers associated with them. So it's a lot of career exploration, but having them learn about all the awesome things in the food systems in Niagara Falls, in Niagara County, in Western New York. Hopefully they find a career path and stay in the region when they graduate from high school. So starting January 11th, it's a 12-week program.
Right. And the 4th pillar is entrepreneurship. This building is really all about entrepreneurship. A lot of workforce things we do in the building when we have a research program or project going on, researchers meet here. But really, this building is for people who want to start businesses. So for $100 a month, anybody can be a member. Now he's a member, pays $100 a month, and he can sit anywhere where he wants it here 24/7, 365, and drink his weight in coffee. So it's free coffee all the time. It's Starbucks coffee. It's made by our cafe here. So part of their lease with us is that they have to have hot coffee here 24/7, 365. So they bought really good services. But I come in the morning, we got good coffee still. And we have offices too. There's offices at most ends of the buildings, but they're all occupied right now. We don't have any offices available. But we sure would like to have more $100 a month coworkers. Because people that are coworkers are scattered around the building all day long and they create energy. The office tenants tend to stay in their offices, and we like energy in the space, and energy comes from people. People need to be moving around. So if you know anybody that wants to start a business or just needs a place to work, we'd love to have them in. On the incubation side, we have 28 people that have been successful in life that have agreed to sit here 1 hour a week and answer questions from our members. Joe Winter is one of them. Joe is a CPA, and to start a business, it's pretty important to get advice early on. Maybe some of our panelists will talk about that importance today. But you want to do things right out the back, and Joe can help with that. If we have 28 people that sit here 1 hour a week, there's a schedule on our website. If you remember, you get a user code and password. You can look and see when the guides are going to be here. And then if you can't match calendars, just let us know. We'll try to figure something out so you can meet the guides. So that's what we do here. Trek. So a little bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded. We have a YouTube channel, and sooner or later this will be up. This time, so that'll be up on the YouTube channel. Restrooms are down this hall. There's coffee, of course, 24/7, and masks are required. If you don't have a mask, we have them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. They will each introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their story, and we're really depending on you, the audience, to ask questions. And if you don't, I'm going to talk. So you're going to want to ask questions. And with that, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Oh,
My name is Nicole Beringer. I am founder and owner of US Traffic Control. We're a Tonawanda-based company. I do work zone traffic control. So the easiest way to describe that is we're the guys on the road in the morning making you late for work. We're detouring traffic, shutting down the lanes. I do anything from DOT to Thruway Authority, big heavy highway repaving projects. We do a lot of emergency response work. We're on call 24/7. No travel ban, we're there. So somebody shears off a hydrant, hits a water main, we go out, detour the traffic. We design and consult on traffic plans for DOT permitting. We have a full-scale manufacturing aspect to what we do, so we make a lot of our own steel products. We have a full-scale sign shop, so I produce temporary and permanent signs as it pertains to traffic control. So Walnut, we actually just redid with all the pedestrian and stop signs. I think that was last year. So you'll see a lot of my stuff out in the road, USTC. So I just ask that you don't run my cones over. But we're in Tonawanda. We service Western and Central New York. We've got another shop in Rochester. I just completed my 9th year this year. We're moving into our 10th season. I've got about 55 employees. I started from nothing. I literally scraped together my couch cushion money and got a small loan from the SBA. I used the ECIDA to build my business plan. So I'm literally the epitome of these programs. I was once you in the audience listening to a guy speak on Jacob's Ladder. They're actually located in the Walter building. And he was speaking on his success. And at the time I looked at my partner and I said, that's what I want to do in 2 years. And in 2 years, I was at the convention center doing the ECIDA. You can do it, we can help. Similar to this. So there's a ton of programs out there and references, and it's just kind of that baby step. And you literally can turn to success in life, it seems like. So that's basically my story.
My name's Jennifer Benz. I own a restaurant on Grand Island called Dick and Jenny's. My husband's a chef. We started in New Orleans. been running restaurants since I was 19. But in New Orleans, we had a very popular locals, like a boutique small restaurant, very small, 65 seats. And we lost our house with Katrina. I grew up here on Grand Island, so we relocated here, took a little time to decide what we were gonna do next. Talked about making goat cheese and different things other than having a restaurant again, but eventually went back to it. So we've been on the island now 13 years, Dick and Jenny's has been there. And through all kinds of cycles between Katrina and COVID and just even our first restaurant, when we were building the first restaurant, you know, not being able to connect to a working drain and jackhammering the kitchen floor when we're at the end of the financing and what are we gonna do? And so lots of creative experience in bootstrapping and getting it together one way or the other. So, and how to sustain, like restaurants are super risky businesses. Obviously, everybody knows how many fail. But the different ways that you can set it up so that you can succeed and handle those challenges as they come in a good way. That's my background.
Katie Krawczyk. I am the founding partner and CEO of a marketing agency called 19 Ideas. We are proudly on the west side of Buffalo. I own the business with my husband, Dan Gigante, who is a serial entrepreneur. He has had a couple of successful companies in the area, and I bring that up because Dan was a big inspiration for me. I never actually swore off entrepreneurialism as a path because actually part of my story is as a kid, I saw my mom have a business that failed, and that was really scarring for our family, and it happens. But it was something that I said to myself, I will work really hard for anyone else, but I will never do it for myself. And then I meet Dan and like, you know, best laid plans, you never say never, because then the universe or God or whatever you might believe says, yep, well, here you go, try this. And he really inspired me to try it. And I didn't have a plan. I did not have a business plan, and I did not have a plan. And that's also very unlike me. And I think my story, and I'm happy to talk more about it this evening, is surprising yourself and really not telling yourself no, and taking risks when you think you would never do such a thing, and where it could lead, and following your intuition can really guide you in a direction where you end up one day and you think, wow, how did I get here? So we have a company of about 20 people and growing. We are a full service marketing agency. My background is PR and communications. I came up more the public affairs government route, and Dan is a web developer by trade. And when I decided to try it, go out on my own, it was in an attempt to leave a pretty toxic work environment. And because I was selling brain power, I didn't need startup capital. I just needed enough in savings to just give it a try for a few months. And I'm a firm believer of when things are meant to be, the doors will open, and they open quickly. And sure enough, within a week of having made the decision, I got my first client. A week later, my second client, and they were with me. Actually, the one is still with me 10 years later. The other one, the first one was with me for the first 3 years. And then I was able to build the business accordingly. And so with my background in PR and comms, Dan's in development. He didn't join me as a partner until two to 3 years into the business. We then rounded out digital marketing, a full development team, and a creative team as well. So yeah, I guess my story is more around the path that you're least expecting to take, and how to, I guess, follow your guts.
Yes, my name is Greg Norton, president of Twisted Rope. My story, I'm old as dirt. I started off in the web game in '96. I'll talk about Twisted Rope. We're similar to 19 Ideas, but we're spread out across, we have staff in Bosnia all the way to than Los Angeles. I have a very dispersed team, multilingual, multinational, they're developers, they're designers, they're animators, motion graphics, project managers, etc. We do a lot of work with multinational companies. It's just what we happen to get into. As for my story, entrepreneurial story, going back, way back, 94, I was working for a Japanese trading company in Houston. I didn't like working for the man. I didn't like being in the bigger corporate world. My brother was living in Tokyo. I have a background in Japan. And we sat down and decided, what could we buy in the United States and sell in Japan for more? And I played ice hockey in Japan when I went to university there. And I saw how much they were paying for a pair of skates. And I realized that I could buy a pair of skates here from a retailer, ship them over there, double the price, and still undercut the competition by 50%. So we did what every wise person will do. We started a mail order hockey shop in Tokyo. And from that, we actually created a brick and mortar store. And then we came across this funky thing called the web, where we were actually able to send emails instead of faxes. Yes, fax machines, way cheaper. And we pivoted. We went from selling hockey equipment to making multilingual websites. And then it kind of grew out from there. So and then I also, at a different phase, I helped to launch the Niagara Charter School. I own property. I'm kind of I don't like to say serial entrepreneur because I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I just find myself getting bored. And then I do something stupid and try something new. So I bootstrap numerous different times. We're still continuing to bootstrap in our company. We have spin-off companies, projects, products, whatever you want to call them. And it's just as nerve-wracking and frustrating as the time my brother and I decided to start a mail order hockey store out of his apartment that was the size of a closet in Tokyo in '94. So I'm like you in the fact that I really didn't go with the plan. I just thought it was cool. So that's my story.
All right, so if anybody got a question, raise your hand, speak up. We don't have mics, I don't think we need them in this small enough group. I want to talk about business plan, maybe not to Greg. Or me. But business plans, especially at some point in time, you're going to need to borrow money, probably, and business plan is pretty important if you're going to borrow money. So you, Nicole, mentioned business plan and the help you got for that.
It was probably the most daunting task as I was thinking about coming into this, that I had to formulate this thing. I'm like, I've already thought of all this. Honestly, it helps you think about everything you think you haven't thought of, but it's really more about the financing. The banks want to see it. Because honestly, I've never looked at it since I got money. Not to say that what isn't happening is in there, but you kind of stray from it pretty quickly. But it really does help you soup to nuts, you know, by thinking about everything. And everything in there, double that. Because you'll need a furnace, you'll need a transmission, you'll need to replace the guy you thought you were hiring on Monday that didn't show up. Like, there's no plan for life, so to speak. So it's a great way to get your footing and to get funding, but honestly, it's not something I've physically worked with in growing the business, except for when you go for that line of credit in a couple of years, you got, you know, amp it up, tweak it again. But Deanna from the ECIBA, she actually is still there. She was instrumental in that. That's something that you can use again and again when you need more funding and help you tweak it. But yeah, it's definitely key in your first starting point. Business. Banks don't want to. The banks don't want to know your name if you don't have a.
Do you find yourself now that you've grown, you find yourself still needing a lot of financing, or
Oh, yes.
do you really?
And I've got decent financing, but there's 20 other people knocking at your door that want you to do the next big project and the next big project. So, you know, that 30-day payable seems like forever when you want to take on that next avenue of business. Or something we started this year is becoming a prime on DOT projects, and you need bonding insurance, which is a whole other piece and aspect, and as you get into these different aspects of the projects, you need pull-out tests, and I mean, it just compiles your costs, but you venture out more and you eventually get to make a bigger piece of that profit, that project, so your financing, if you're doing it right, I say, you'll always need more and more, because ideally you're growing. We have enough to sustain, but if you're an entrepreneur, you're not looking to keep the baseline. You want to grow and do better and do less and have more people doing more for you over time. So you can start up that next business. But yeah, I mean, it's ever changing, ever growing as far as your needs. From financing to people to skill. So.
Jenny,
We didn't, so I have a very different business than this, because I'm very much brick and mortar, selling something that you're eating, you know, I'm more of the baseline, the old school thing, you know. And so when we opened, I mentioned the jackhammering the concrete floor. So what we did is my husband and I are newly married, and we bought a building. We were very creative, and we bought this old restaurant that was next to a house. And so we were able to buy with an FHA loan as our first house. And the restaurant was so dilapidated, it was called a shed or garage or something. So we got in for I think our down payment was $5,000. And then started doing it ourselves. And it was an old
so the bank thought it was a house.
bank. Well, there was a house.
Yeah.
There was a house. There was a house. And the house was like a Section 8 rental. It was not in great shape, but it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. And then it was on a double lot, and the restaurant was next to it that had been shuttered for it had been shuttered because of bad construction project with bed conversions. It actually closed this main street and for like 4 years. And the people just shut the door, you know, like there was still disgusting bags of fish in the freezer, and you know it was completely overrun with rats and roaches, and yes, the neighbors were so thankful. Whether they're like, you're crazy, but so the building was in really tough shape. But if we did legwork, it wasn't even for sale. It was actually the first restaurant my husband had eaten in when he moved to New Orleans 10-15 years prior, and he loved it. It was on a corner. So basic real estate, good things on the corner, standalone, high traffic count, parking lot across the street, you know, checking up all the things for restaurants that you need, you know, the basics. Like those are things that you take out of like the franchise books, you know, what these big companies succeed with in their locations. But those are really easy things to find. So standalone, high traffic count. Good visibility, parking. Okay, we got it all. So we found the guy's name in the tax rolls, which is all easy to get. Called them up and made an offer. You know, they were in their 60s. It had literally been closed for at least 3 years. So made an offer, made the deal work. There were some hurdles there. The egos got in the way, but made it work. And we were able, you know, our creative financing was an FHA loan with minimal down, and then, okay, you go for it. So did all the work, but then our biggest snag was the plumbing and electrical. We obviously brought in professionals to finish it off. We're almost done, and the kitchen had a floating slab. The building's a floating slab. So they go to connect the drains into this drain, central drain in the middle of the floor, and they discovered that the cast iron drain pipe in the ground in New Orleans, which is very wet, is all collapsed. So they start jackhammering the middle of the kitchen floor 10 feet at a time, trying to connect. Nope, I'm gonna keep going. It was like $1,000 every 10 feet. For us, this was like the end of the project. Like, and I'm like, we're not gonna get open. Like, they're gonna have a lien on the building, we're not gonna get open. And my husband saw it was a church selling bricks. And he's like, I think we can do that. And we had a lot of connections. My husband was a chef. He worked for Commander's Palace and 2 other boutique restaurants where he had been well reviewed and well known. I managed high-end flower shop that had a well-heeled clientele that was very small. So you had lots of name recognition. They knew what we were doing. And so we put it out there. It was like Dick and Jenny's Gourmet Club. Buy a plate. You got a plate on the wall. We gave them for $100. They got 5 $50 gift cards, paper then, you know. And so we had this great response. Plumber bought 2 plates. And my husband's a good artist, so he painted all the plates and hung them on the wall. And it created such an upswell. So we got done, we got open, but people bought these for $100. They got 5 $50 gift cards, gift certificates, and they gave them to friends as we opened in September. So it was like a Christmas thing. And people held them and didn't use them. They're like, no, we're not gonna use it, we're paying now. We'll use them way down the road. But it got rid of the, you know, when a restaurant first opens and you have this empty, awkward dining room where no one's really found it yet, never happened because you had these free things out there. So you always had a buzz, you always had a good thing. So we got out of the gate right away. So we opened in September, we reviewed it literally on Thanksgiving Day, the front page of the paper above the Times-Picayune thing, it said, Dick and Jenny's better get in line now. And it's like, oh, I mean, it's awesome. Wow. Yeah, so that, and we opened with 12 tables. That was it, super small. But, you know, just this kind of a crowdfunding kind of thing from jackhammering the floor to we're not going to get open to, okay, and we didn't take reservations. So we opened at 5:30. We're full at 5:45 and there was a line on the block. That was it.
What part of New Orleans were you?
Uptown. You know where Tipitina's is?
Where?
Tipitina's, uptown, right in the middle of uptown. So it's like the locals there. It's kind of like what Elmwood or Allentown would be, you know, not in the quarter,
Right.
you know, but in a place where there's a lot of houses and stuff.
Oh,
Yeah, so. But not much of a business plan, more of like, get your financing, get into the, in restaurants, I believe a big thing is protecting your rent. I think that's one of the biggest things for restaurants is they do well, they have rent, and that's a hard hurdle. A lot of those leases are tied to your sales. So if you can own your property, it really protects your back end. When things get lousy, you know, you can still go and cook and turn the lights on. But that rent in tough times for restaurants can become a cash flow problem.
Great. Can I redirect, considering I took a shot from you about not having a plan? There's something to keep in mind, and I obviously don't know what businesses you're starting up doing, et cetera. When you're a service business, true service, like, you know, what we do, or you're a recent college graduate with 0 assets and only $2,500 in the bank and a car, and you decide you're going to start selling a coffee equipment in a can, you got to get creative, because a business plan at ECIDA doesn't work. Banks don't want to fund it. You're in a situation in which it's, what do I got? And that's not a scenario where, like, banks wouldn't talk to us until we had made it, whatever it was. And even the best conversation I ever had with my banker, I had lunch with him 5 years ago, and he said, should we increase your line? I was like, well, I don't need it. He goes, this is the time. You know, that it took me, I'm 54, right?
Yeah, right.
It took me 30 years to get to the point where my bank offered me more money. My point being, though, is, you know, for us, we literally, I maxed my credit cards. I sold my car. I just needed cash to be able to go into those retailers and say, here's $5,000 I'm gonna buy. That stays those 2 and ship it and hope to high heaven my brother could sell it so that I could get the cash back and buy more. So that's where it wasn't so much, you know, when you're a service business, banks don't really want to talk to you because it's really just reputational. So it's also how you're gonna, what point you're entering in business. And whether or not, in our case it was just constant churning to get cash to buy the next. And that was just all we were doing. We were just in a constant race. And I lived off my wife. And it's what everybody else does, right? So for a while, exactly. So, but you know, protecting your primary income doesn't change. Even now, our primary business is what I'm most concerned about day in and day out, because I gotta pay 25 different people, and da, 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 da. And capital's gotta come from somewhere, and my bank doesn't wanna hear about our ventures. They don't wanna hear about the, the augmented reality this, or the live streaming that. So it's always about, carving out a little bit of that income, a little bit of that free cash to start just, your own startup. So if you can swing it and you're in that same kind of, Greg as a recent college student, da 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 stage, it's how do you keep the income coming in? And it could be that other job that you're keeping. And it's just so that you're maintaining the word. I always felt the worst place to be was with no income coming in at all. I mean, you wanna really get a bad frame of mind and make really shitty decisions, have no income coming in with no fallback. So keeping that income going, whether it's slinging hot dogs or working, whatever it might be, to keep that going, it's time versus money. And sometimes you don't have the money, but then you're putting in the extra time, you're working the extra time. So protecting that primary income, whatever that primary income might be, is critical, and it doesn't really change, even when you're getting larger and larger and larger. That new venture, that new location, if you're gonna open up that new restaurant, right, you're gonna make sure that mothership stays functioning well, because once you extend over to that, you're getting in its primary, protecting that primary income wherever you are. So I did have one, sorry. It wasn't one that I could take to a bank that would say, sure, I'm gonna give you a lot of money, you can take all these assets and ship them over to Japan, and you'd never be able to do that. So, just to my own defense. Not that I took it personally.
You had some points, I know you did.
So, I mean, I think what Greg just said is really valuable in so many ways. What he was also saying, I'll just say at this point too, that point where if you are not paying yourself, or if you don't have a source of income to sustain yourself, it is the fastest way to making bad decisions, as he said. And then you are really shooting yourself in the foot with trying to get your business off the ground. And I mentioned my husband, Dan, so he bought into 19 Ideas about 3 years into that business, but he had a t-shirt business at the same time that I was acting as his director of marketing, which is another story. Congratulations, right? And living off what, because like honestly, having two people tied to a business in one household is a really scary proposition, because sometimes you do need to lean on the other partner to help support. But it is a situation, and we saw this more with the t-shirt business, because that did require a lot of upfront capital versus the professional services of 19 Ideas was just brain power. And I was able to, if I worked, the longest I would have to wait would be 30 days. So if I could sustain myself on savings or credit cards to make the invoice, then I was okay. But then also to Greg's point, where can you reinvest some of that income back in the business? If it means, for us in the early days with 19 Ideas, it might have been paying a designer to brand us or to get some sort of like marketing materials, really nice business cards. But for the t-shirt business, it was a drain on capital. And to Greg's point, like banks, ECIDA, I'm glad that Nicole brought them up, because we had the most success with getting some funding for the t-shirt business with the ECIDA. The banks just don't want to hear you. They don't want to hear whatever reputation you had. That even if you have a business plan, which we did for the shirt company, and even with showing some success over like a year or two, it wasn't necessarily enough, not really. And to your point too about, this is just a tidbit. I'm 10 years in business this year with 19 Ideas, and we ended up leaving, I'll refrain from saying the name, but we ended up leaving a pretty large bank in town because they didn't bother to get to know who we were. It didn't matter that more than $1 million was passing through their banks every year when we got to that point. They still didn't know who we were. So we left for a smaller community bank, and at least they're getting more attention, but we are starting to finally have those conversations around like, what do you need from us? Do you need to increase your line of credit? But in the early days, there was no conversation. It was clawing and scratching wherever you could get any sort of attention, which is why capitalizing on programs, the ECIDA, really making relationships with people so that they start to know who you are, they get to see what you're doing in business and then grow with you. I think that was part of the problem that we had when we opened up an account, when we were, when it was just me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't even care. No one was even paying attention to how we eventually grew. Like I said, more than $1 million passing through the accounts, didn't matter. So I just want to echo what Greg was saying about reinvesting, because I find, again, 10 years later, we're still doing that. We're finding our lending issues are much different at this stage of the game, because it's not startup capital anymore. It's more, how do you grow? How do you go from, you've gone from point A to point B, but now how do you get to point C? And for us, we're trying to take on larger projects. And in our world, some of those larger, more longer term projects might be with, say, the state or a federal contract. But then there's a lot of risk that, the government doesn't want to assume any of that risk. They want to put it on the business. But if you're a small business of 20 people, maybe 2.5 million total in revenue, but you have to front $500,000 in costs to contractors or your employees, how are you getting that? And so it's like, it becomes an interesting sort of creative problem solving, where you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but it's the income that you're getting from potentially work that you got from this client. It's not a 1-for-1 thing. It's just going to feed the overall business. Dan and I know that we're going to have to float some personal cash that we know that we're going to be able to get back, but these are the risk assessments you have to take. Will I be able to get that money back? Yes, I feel confident. Okay, then I can lend the personal money to the business. If the answer is no, then that's probably not the right opportunity. But we have to kind of do those things in order to say, yeah, now we did this 20-month project for New York State. Look at what we can put in our portfolio. Now we're better positioned to get the next project of that size. But it's not without massive headache. And I think another thing that Greg said that I really resonate with is the same headaches that you had when you started might be, the headache is maybe the same, the cause of the headache might be a little bit different, it's just a different problem. And as you grow, it's, I don't know, your challenges become a little bit bigger. So I don't know, I wanted to echo a lot of what he said. It was really, really great points.
My first mentor was my first wife's father. He used to say, banks will lend you money as soon as you prove you don't need it. And I think we've heard that here a couple of times. I wanted to mention credit cards in your marriage. So one of the things we try to do here is not sugarcoat what it's like being an entrepreneur and what you might be in for. And one of the lessons I learned the hard way is make sure your spouse or your partner is with you and is along for what's undoubtedly going to be a rough ride. So my story is I worked for UPS, had a very good job. UPS paid well. I was doing fine. And I realized I wanted to do something else, so I started the business, and I did it, started the business, and then I told my spouse I was going to leave UPS 1 year later. During that year, I said yes to every credit card offer that came in the mail. And by the time I left UPS, I had a stack of credit cards this big, I had 50 credit cards. And basically, my family lived off those credit cards because I would do work. It was a logistics business, so we do work for companies, send them a bill. 30 days later, they pay me, but I had to pay the trucking companies and my employees in 7 days. So I was always doing what Greg was doing: buy a little equipment, sell it for a lot of money, and then use that money to buy more equipment. Just keep doing this. So at one point in time, the business had grown a little bit. I don't remember exactly how big the payroll was or how many employees we had, but it was, I had to make payroll. My office manager comes to me on Monday and says, we don't have any money. And I said, all right, well, I'll call some customers and make sure that they get us some money and pay us. And I make the calls. The next day she says, did you make the calls? I said, yes. She goes, good, because we don't have any money. The third Wednesday, she says, when do you think they're going to pay us? Because we don't have any money. On Thursday, she says, I'm supposed to transfer money to the payroll account today, we don't have any money. I said, don't worry, I'll be back. And I go to the bank with my 50 credit cards, and I put one in after another and take out whatever that bank would allow me. Some would allow me $200, some would be $250, $500. I just, all these people are behind me wondering what the hell I'm doing. One credit card after another. And I bring her back the money and I said, here's the money for the payroll account. And she looked at me like, I'm not asking. Where you got this bag for $20 bills? So that night, I went home and my wife says, how are you today? I said, good. Anything unusual happens? No. Well, I had to make payroll with our credit cards. I'll tell you, we were married another 10 years, but that marriage was over that day. She went through the roof, She said, you mean to tell me we've been living for 3 years off these credit cards and now your employers are living off our credit cards? She was livid. And one of the things, the other lesson I learned is how lonely it is to be an entrepreneur, because over the next year and a half, I had to make payroll 3 more times by going to the ATM and taking the money out of the ATM. And I told no one. I did not tell my spouse. I didn't tell my banker. I didn't tell my accountant. I didn't tell my lawyer. I didn't tell any employees. I didn't tell my vendors. I didn't tell anyone. How could I tell everybody I'm making payroll on this wonderful company I got by hitting the ATM? And it was, I didn't realize it until years later, stress that causes when you're an entrepreneur. There's no one to talk to. But for me, what I found is 2 things. I joined Rotary, and Rotary it was different then than it is now, but it's primarily people that own their own business. So they could kind of identify with you, but most of them didn't start that business. Most of them, their father started the business. So they didn't go through this making payroll with ATMs. But then I went through the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, and I know lots of people here have gone through that program. And suddenly I was with 18 other people that knew exactly what I was talking about when whatever problem it was. And I know your father went through just before me or after me. And that was those people that I went through that course with. I went through that course in 1981, not 18. And those people, I just talked to one of my classmates the day before yesterday. I had an idea and I wanted somebody to talk to. That's who I call. Those people still are some of my best friends. There are people I know I can trust. When I've got a crazy entrepreneurial idea, that's who I call. So getting that support system, I think, and that's why I think incubators are successful, because everybody in this place, Jim Sheehan's going through it. One of our members now, he's going through it. Lots of people are our members here. And that's why we want them to bump into each other, because they actually bump into each other. They sit down, they talk, and they become a self-mentoring group. Because mentorship is a heavy word. And the other thing I learned, I'll shut up. When I went through CEL, I was assigned a mentor, and it was just no chemistry with this mentor. I would met with this guy once a month for 12 months. I can't even remember his name, and I know he doesn't remember my name. He didn't remember my name from month to month. But my classmates became my mentors. Those are the people I call when I have questions. And that peer-to-peer mentoring is really important. I think that's why facilities like this are important, and that's why we try to have as few walls as possible, so that you can walk around in here and bump into another entrepreneur and say, hey, did you ever run across this? And whatever the problem is, there's hopefully somebody there that you can talk to about it. And they may say, call Joe, call one of the guys. I know that this guy has been through that problem. We should talk to him. So we do. Some people are texting me questions. So we have a question that's about T-shirts.
Oh, boy.
And this made me texted me before we talked about this. How do you launch a small business selling merchandise, sweatshirts, t-shirts, etc., with just a few $1,000s? Is that even possible?
Great,
And I think you,
great question, because that's all we had. I think we had 10,000 in savings and that's obviously even more than what the question offered. So, man, merchandising is so hard because you have to have inventory, and then you talk about sizing. And are you doing men's and women's and children? Are you, there's so many questions there. And is it multiple styles? Where are you selling? Is it strictly online? Is it brick and mortar? Are you wholesaling? Are you tabling at events? There are so many questions around it. I think my advice would be, you want to pilot things. So if you've got an idea for merchandise, you might want to start with one item, do a limited run, and test it at, say, try to figure out who your audience is first. And if there's a store, whether it's online or brick and mortar, I would that's similar, taps into the same type of market or shopper, I would partner, and I would see about a wholesale opportunity or a pop-up opportunity and see how you do, and try to create buzz that way. I think that you're gonna, to Greg's earlier point about needing to make money, you have to make sure that you're getting some income back in order to make your next order on more merch to sell. But the last thing you want to do in merchandising is just so tricky. Retail is so tricky because what you don't want is inventory, because it's just your savings sitting there staring you in the face, and that can get really, it can really mess with you. Especially if you've taken from savings to buy that merchandise, and then it's just sitting there and you have other needs financially to invest. So
where you buy a lot of food in the pandemic hits.
yeah, exactly. And I think too, my husband is, he transitioned, the name of the company was Yunhu. And he eventually transitioned that model into what's now 26 shirts. And the idea of that model is it's pre-orders. So it's a 2-week limited run of the t-shirts. And those pre-orders, when you buy the shirt, you don't get the shirt for another 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But it's brilliant because it helps solve a lot of the inventory issues that we were having. Because instead of guessing what's going to sell or guessing the sizes, now you know. So, and that's also kind of what crowdsourcing does in a way, if you think about it, pre-orders. So now you know how many you have to order, and again, with merchandise and sizing. So I would say you have to really get creative with what you would think about doing for a physical product, especially something like clothing or apparel that would run multiple sizes, again, male, female, children, etc., or even pets, which is a thing.
Related to business plans, just correction. So we're in Niagara County, so I think most everybody here is in Niagara County, so you would go to the Niagara County IDA. Or more likely, maybe in the same building is the Small Business Development Center. It's run by, it's at Niagara Community College. Deanna works for the Small Business Development Center. Deanna, kill me if I tell anybody this, but she helped write my business plan. That was in the 1900s. But I was trying to get an SBA guarantee loan and a loan from the Niagara County IDA, actually, which was before I could get a bank loan. And I had a business plan, and they didn't like it. They didn't. I said, "What's wrong with my plan?" They said, "Nothing wrong with your plan. It's just we don't want it to look like that. We want it to look a different way." And I was like, "I got a business to run. I don't have time for this." And I said, "Go see Deanna." And Deanna took my business plan and rewrote it in a way that they liked the format, and I got the loan. So, that was from the Niagara County IDA. So that's a place to start, but it requires a match. If you don't put any money into the business, they're not going to put any money in. It's not like you could just start with the Niagara County IDA's money and not have your own money in it. So that's the caveat there. You gotta- and by the time I got an on the IBA loan, business was probably 5 years old. So, I had a track record, and I had some money in the business. We have a question about risk. Go ahead here.
I was gonna say, or I was gonna ask, bootstrapping suggests you're kind of like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. But I imagine that everybody here, had some help from somewhere, whether it's your county IDA or just somebody that gave you an idea or some place to look. How'd you go about finding these people, or how did you come across the people that helped you along the way to make the business successful?
For me, it was sitting in a room like this, like you guys are now, going to N-Trip and listening to the ECIDA talk or the Niagara County, and just kind of starting that path, reaching out to the SBA, what kind of programs, what kind of grants. A lot of times certain areas have grants, if you want to be in Niagara County, sometimes there's certain areas that they want to infuse with business or money, and there's money there to be had already. So if you don't necessarily have to be in a certain place, and that makes no difference to you, just starting down that course, and then, one door opens, another closes, it takes you down the next route. So, and to speak about, going to the bank to start, nobody's gonna listen to you. Nobody's gonna want to give you any money without, you having skin in the game, but that shouldn't deter you from starting those conversations and starting to build those relationships. Because you start at the bank and you go to the small business development, you find that grant, you find that loan, you go back to the bank and say, look, they're invested in me, look at this great business plan, look at these sales. And they might say, nope, you're not ready yet, but keep building that relationship. And a great point on the smaller banks. I left M&T for Citizens and found better at Buffalo, Bank of Buffalo. They are really driven in terms of smaller customers that need, that are passionate and want to, build their business. These bigger banks, they have set guidelines on who they lend to and why their exposure is bigger. So a smaller bank might fit you better, and then over time, but you should always be building relationships everywhere, even if they might not necessarily serve you in that moment. You never know where you're going to cross paths with that person at some other facility. That banker that turned you down there might be working for the SBA in 2 years. Oh my God, great to see you again. Like, it's just building those conversations, and just, I think the biggest thing in being an entrepreneur is maintaining your momentum, because you'll be exhausted. If you're getting into business for yourself to work less and to make more, it doesn't.
It's false. It's never worked harder in my life.
And even when you're a success, you're working even that much harder because you built this engine that you now want to protect as your child. You're making sure that it's got the funding, it's got the money, it's got the talent, and it keeps moving. Because now you've got 50 people that count on you for their income and support the family. So your obligations are ever growing, So to speak to what you guys were saying in terms of when you do make some money and you want to keep growing, infusing that money in areas that make you more money. It'd be great to have 60 cases of t-shirts on the shelf for when I get those orders, but hiring somebody that can print those shirts might be a better investment than that dead stock on the shelf. So that was something my fiance and I own and run it together, and we're always looking at, if it's something I can do myself to start, don't put the money in there. So I always joke that I was shipping and receiving and logistics and AR and AP. So when you would call, this is Peggy, how can I help you? You wear all those hats, and you become every aspect of that company until you can really afford to put somebody into, okay, can they answer my phone to do invoicing now? Does that revenue stream really need to go there, or should I invest in a position that's going to generate more income to the bottom line? Because that payroll comes every week, and that's going to be your biggest nut for a very long time. That payroll is everything, because I know most of you wouldn't go to work if you weren't getting paid, right? Your people are your key. That's the biggest thing in my company, is my culture. I take great care of my employees because they're going to take great care of my customers. It just becomes the culture. So that payroll is the biggest obligation every week.
That was going to be one of my questions. As far as all of you guys, do you have the most employees of
I don't know, I think Greg is.
No, I want to.
Really?
I'm like 25.
Yeah, 20.
So out of all like the 20 years, do you find keeping reliable employees to be the biggest issue with your business, or?
For me, I've been very lucky. I have a very small turnover rate. A lot of the guys that started the company with me are still with me. Father, sons, cousins, brothers, referrals. I'm very selective on who I bring into my team, given the nature of what we do is very dangerous. And you gotta have a great rapport with the guys that you're entrusting your lives with out on the road, you know? So we have a flagging division with a younger group of guys with a little more turnover rate. But with any company, you know, you have your challenges, especially in the last 2 years, you know, there's a lot more incentive to stay home and get unemployment than there is to come in and work. So it's been a little bit of a juggle in the last 2 years, but I've been blessed with being essential. Biggest thing I've learned in the last 2 years is the most of the traffic is for these non-essential commuters. It's been nice on the roads the last couple of years, it's been a little quieter, but I've been very lucky keeping a lot of the same staff. I like to think that speaks to the culture we keep and, you know, the kind of camaraderie we build in the team, but it does change. Summertime, you know, people want to be out on the golf course or taking that extra trip, so, you know, it changes season to season. But I've been pretty lucky overall.
It changes a lot. So we just, September 28th, so Dick and Jenny's is more with the needs. Like when we moved up here after Katrina, we bought an old building called Dylan Herb's. It's been abandoned for a couple of years and like a sucker for old buildings, put way too much money into it. Opened and it was February of, oh my gosh, I do this all the time. 2008 is the recession. Like, so it's, you know, this is when the mortgage.com thing, the interest rates are all exploding. So after, you know, going through Katrina, basically being unemployed, we sold our restaurant in New Orleans to our employees down there, to a super awesome tight crew. So they bought Dick and Jenny's. And then up here, we opened in the middle of the recession and we're opening up started as a coffee house, like pastry coffee house, because our kids are little. And then all of a sudden, this, you know, you've been unemployed for 5 years, then you have a new business and then recession. It's like we're doing everything ourselves. The community wanted more food, so we ended up adding lunch, adding breakfast, ended up adding dinner. So now with COVID, now I've got a restaurant that's open 5 days a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then so, you know, you pivot again. It's like, okay, well, whatever. So now we just, since the end of September, we just closed down breakfast and lunch. And now we're dinner only. Because we were getting so, like I was cresting 35 employees. And it was just, with COVID, it's like, you had to staff so much extra to accommodate people who were sick. Because again, we're face to face with customers. So you can't have anybody with, even if it's common cold, you can't be on the floor, you can't be in the building. So all of a sudden, I've got 35 employees and I'm so busy because so many other places are closed. Like I was working crazy hours. So we got to the point of September, like we had 2 managers who've been with us 8 years and 10 years. At the beginning of the pandemic, changed careers. One got a job at the state at Sabre. He runs the Niagara Coast Culinary program there, and the other one became a brick mason. But they've been with me forever, so that was fine to lose that salary at the beginning of the pandemic. But this past summer, it's like full tilt chaos, and I'm the only manager. You know, my husband's a chef, but he's not managing people or books or marketing or menus or anything else. So it was like, okay, we're gonna have to change because I'm going crazy. So September 28th, we killed off breakfast and lunch, just dinner. And just kind of reorganize, like, okay, I'm gonna pull a couple key people up out of day and put them in the night and, you know, just kind of recenter, because we got to the point with so many part-time, the restaurant's different, you know, a lot of people are using it as a part-time side gig, they're working the day job and this is the extra money. But then anything they wanna do, a wedding or anything else, it's like, oh, well, I'm not working that day. It's like, well, you know, I'm glad it's your part-time gig. You're killing me. So, you know, we really try to, like, in New Orleans, we had insurance for waiters, like, you know, nobody had insurance for waiters in that gate. You know, trying to get them we got all of our waiters bought houses, which back then the bank wouldn't give, anybody who made tips. No way, not gonna get, so, but these are people that made, in New Orleans where it's cheap living, they made $45,000, $50,000 a year. But because it was gratuity, no. So like, but as an employer, you want these people to have houses. You want them to be stable. You want them to be with you and, be this solid crew. So like you develop relationships and, you have creative realtors and, they fill out paperwork and send you employment verifications and you leave a lot of blanks and here's the pay stubs, you figure it out. I don't know. There you go. And, what's your title? Well, as a customer service rep. Exactly. You absolutely are a customer. You're managing my liquor inventory, right? You're my, these kinds of things to help people manage the system, right? And then you get to the point where, okay, now everybody has a house, now you've got this solid group, so solid that they bought the restaurant from us, like building that foundation underneath. But sometimes you gotta make hard decisions. So like we got to this point here and it's like, this is just not working. I either have to hire a manager at 50 or 60,000 into a breakfast lunch shift that's less profitable with higher costs in food, higher costs in wages, uncertainty going into a winter with COVID still around. It's like, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm in it to protect everybody down the road. So we're gonna have to make this decision now, So it's sad. I had one girl who'd been there since, she'd been there 13 years. And she doesn't want to work nights. I got a spot if you want to come, but she doesn't want to work. She's worked daytime, Tuesday through Friday forever. She don't want to work Saturday. Yeah, well, we're closed Sunday and Monday. So, sometimes you diverge from what's best from all of you. But you can't make everybody happy. So, but you try and build something so that you have a group that you can rely on, that'll help you build, and get you through when it's lousy. So you dial it down and have just the core group. And the core group helps the new people acclimate in, this is what it's gonna be.
I'm glad to hear these questions about employees and payroll, because when Roscoe and I were thinking about the panel, we really wanted to find people that started their own business from scratch and had grown it to at least 15 employees. Because when you have to make payroll or retain people, it's a lot different than 1099 business where just being a sole buyer. It's another animal.
And I just to your question about how do you make the connections? One thing that I found I needed to change is I didn't tell many people about what I was doing, much to my detriment. I actually, for the hockey business, I got my first quote unquote investor because it was a guy on my hockey team. And I started telling him about what I was doing. He thought it was unique and interesting. My accountant now plays on my other hockey team. It's 20 years later. It was through, you don't know where the connection comes from. The other thing is there's a tendency to believe that people don't want to help you. They're too busy. Pat was talking about such entrepreneurial leadership, Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. The number of people that want to be mentors to people is amazing. They usually have to turn people away. They don't have enough people in a class for all the people who want to help. Don't be afraid to drop an email. I get so many emails from brokers wanting to sell me stuff. I rarely get emails from somebody contacting me saying, "Thinking about starting a digital agency. What you do? How do I get started?" I would much rather answer that than talking to a broker who wants to do whatever. So don't be afraid to just tell me, but you do get into a situation also where you're gonna get negativity, right? And how do you take the negativity? So, that'll never work. Believe me, you guys probably all talk to naysayers everywhere, right? They're replete and they're constant, but there's some voices that are rational and you need to listen to. So it's how do you make, because you really love hearing the echo chamber, like this is gonna be great, it's gonna be the greatest idea I've ever heard. Those are as dangerous as the negative ones. So trying to find that balance, but talk it out, tell people what you're doing, ask, don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to ask for advice. It just,
You're a good at it. Was there a reason why you did, like, talk about it so much? Was it just anxiety?
part of it was embarrassment, like I thought, who the hell starts selling hockey from Japan, right? That's kind of like, it was just, part of that was that, not wanting to tell people, you want to tell people what you're doing when it's successful. Look what I did, slam dunk, Steve Jobs, that's me, right? But we gotta remember there, for every Steve Jobs, there's 100,000 are slaving away trying to make it go. So I guess to a certain extent, it's the embarrassment of saying like, well, how many have you sold? Oh, I've sold 6 pairs of skates, right? That kind of thing, right? It's almost like the bank. The bank doesn't want to talk to you, so you're really successful. I think we kind of color our own aspects of being like, why should I bother someone that's only an IT guy at this point, right? So, and also, I was 24 years old, I was an idiot, right? Ignorance is bliss. So, but now, even now, because when I do a new venture and do a new thing, I don't want it to necessarily color the reputation of the organization, right? So I don't want that stubbing of the foot. So I even now kind of behaving in a similar way, because I've got to present a persona of success right over here, so that this other thing here is kind of, well, that's a side thing. That's not really, that don't judge us by that. I guess it's kind of a manifestation of the same concept, right? Don't judge me by the fact that I've got this crazy idea. Right? I don't know if that helps.
Presenting the persona that everything is great is a skill and an art that you have to learn, truthfully, because it's going to be difficult. There will be hard times, and there's gonna be days when you don't want to do it. And I have learned that, but you have to portray confidence no matter what, because whether it's the funder or your partners that you're doing business with, your clients, your customers, or your employees, or your family, to tell them, don't worry, everything's all right. It's not to say that you're lying, because it can feel like, what am I doing? To Pat's comment, which I want to comment on, about how lonely it can feel. You do have to portray confidence, and I think one thing that's so critical is the belief in not only what you're doing, but you have to have a strong belief of self, because it's easy to doubt. There's going to be 1,000 or more things that come up to throw doubt at every which way, and we all have our stuff, to doubt ourselves on a regular basis anyway, right? And this is difficult. This will be, I truthfully feel like having a business, and I don't say this to scare anyone, but it is the most difficult thing you can do, I feel, at least, or certainly one of them. And both Pat and Greg touched on this, having not just a support system of mentorships or other business owners or founders, you really have to even have friends that can have the people who are going to have your back, and maybe not your family, like your spouse. It can get really scary when it's like you're talking about household income, but somebody who doesn't necessarily have the same skin in the game, but who can give it to you straight, and you can bounce ideas off of, and they can tell you truthfully, like, or they can poke holes a little bit, like, yeah, okay, well, how would you do this, and how would you approach that? Because you need to have that banter. Sometimes you need to flesh out those ideas, and not just with ideas to like spin off different things, because I know it sounds like Greg's got a lot of different things. So, but say for me, like, we've got the one business, but if we want to try something new within the existing business model, who do you talk to? And I mentioned at the start of this that my husband ended up buying into the company. He had his own thing. So I ran things on my own for 3 years, and granted, he was at the desk over doing a different company, so I could at least, bend his ear on stuff. But for people who are solo entrepreneurs versus those who have a partner, I can't imagine how you felt being alone at that ATM, because it's tough even with a partner. And so you really need to have your people around you, because even as much as, and I agree with what Nicole's talking about with building a really strong culture, your employees will never get it. They will not, and I don't want to say that it's an us versus them kind of thing, because, you know, I'm very much, I'm intentionally building a more flat organization where hierarchy isn't really a thing. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, I'm the one making the decisions, or my husband and I together as partners are making decisions. But I'm trying to build an environment where people feel like their voices are heard, but they can leave at any time. And they do not have the kind of responsibilities that Dan and I do, and they are not faced with making the kind of decisions that we have to, that can be really difficult, or the sacrifices either. So when you're in that kind of position, you need people around you, and not just a few, but like a lot of people around you to kind of tell you to keep it going, and not just keep your spirits up, because it can get down, but the people who are going to be able to I guess, push you in a way to make what you're thinking about even better, if that makes sense. So not the overly positive people, not the naysayers. There's plenty of both, but a good mix, and trying to, there's a lot of, I mentioned earlier too, intuition and discernment are two of your most important tools. You have to be able to look at a situation or somebody that you're talking to and say, is what they're telling me, is there value in this? Where can I apply that value? Because it might not be everything that they're saying, but if you learn a nugget or two, you know, figure out how everyone has a perspective and everyone has a valid perspective, but how can it work for you in your business? So just to say that building that tribe of people, however that might come, is just so critical to success.
To your point also, the one thing I've been really getting hammered into me, because we're going into more of a startup mode. Maybe when you're doing what you've been doing for 20 years, and you're starting to do these little startups. And so I actually have a couple different mentors I talk to regularly, and they wake me up to certain things. And the one interesting thing that one of them always does is he said, "What have your wins been?" And I'm like, I don't want to talk about wins. I'm like, you know, I want to just go right to the so frustrated by this. You know, I was just like, and he forces me to start to realize that there's a lot of gains you make that aren't necessarily directly tied to your revenue. You knock down a lot of walls to get certain places. And one of the things that, you know, learning from the failure, and there's a great article at Harvard Business Review I got a free, I got what do you call it, a subscription to it, so I've been reading it lately. And a whole article talking about how innovation gets killed by fear, how innovation gets killed by failure. Because it puts you in a negative frame of mind, and you have to battle through that. And so the idea of looking at something and saying, you know, the person who contacted you said about the t-shirts, well, can you do it on $1,000? Hell yeah, you can do it on $10. I mean, you can work in certain ways. I mean, it's possible. It's not really the amount of money. But going into it, and under what you're saying about the pre-ordering, it's a safer way of saying, okay, is this with no money down? Can I sell this? Right? Is this going to be viable for me? Like, and how much does it take me for me to go online and set up a survey, get that sent out to people? Do I sit there and go, I got 60 answers and all of them were negative? Well, you got to take that as a win. You took the time to put it online and get the questions, get them answered, and you got more information than you had before. Not to say that you're going to be in this, but then you got to get serious at a certain point, right? All this peripheral information gets to a certain point, you have to advance it. But just the idea of how do you learn from failure? And I don't even like that. You know, some people say there's no such thing as failure, it's feedback. But you gotta stub your toe to know. But do you take the information from it? Is critical, because you're gonna have to take that mindset of going, I'm making gains, I'm making progress, I'm getting there. Because you're gonna have to pump yourself up at certain times. So that's just kind of what I was tangentially off of what you were saying, is even now, I mean, I have to remind myself, don't sweat, there'll be it tomorrow, it'll be great. Even though I got this other business that's just crushing it, I'm focused on this one over here that's not, because that's just how we are.
I think that's it. Like, you don't focus on things you have accomplished, because you're always looking at what can I do more, what can I do better at. That's a great point.
Where are the
You don't
holes
give
in it?
yourself enough credit, even whether it's the first year, the first month. What have I done? What have I accomplished?
Yeah.
It's definitely not a focus of mine. It's always, what have I not gotten done?
No.
Well,
What could I have done
yeah.
more?
if you think about it, as an entrepreneur, you're always trying to solve a problem. That's how you get started. You're solving a problem. So you only look at problems. And that's also why you need people to kind of point out, hey, what about this great thing you just did? Even though you might think, oh, that thing, that wasn't a big deal, because maybe it was like no big deal to you. But, you know, it really moved the needle on a thing that you don't have your eye on, because that's doing all right. You're real focused on the problem. But
One of the biggest things when I started was be prepared to not exist in terms of your family, or your friends, or your hobbies. I'm a 24-hour emergency service business, as I mentioned. So for the first 6 years of that, I answered every phone call, processed every invoice, every hour of every day. I have woken up in the middle of the night with half-written order, speaking to somebody that I don't remember the phone ringing. I don't remember saying hello. I'm just awake in the middle of an order. Many years of that, to when I finally hired an overnight dispatch, and then I started realizing, like, I don't know what to do with myself. I have a day off. I don't have to answer a phone in the evening. And then you have to start to get to know yourself all over again. And creating a work-life balance is really key. I know you guys speak a lot about, you know, people assisting you or mentoring you. That's not something I even was on my radar. Like, I need to get to work. I need to make money. My boyfriend at the time was supporting me, which was completely foreign and was probably the biggest driving force. It's like, no man has ever taken care of me. No one will ever take care of me. So this can't fail. Like, I was all in. So that more than anything was a driving force, but I wish I would have known about mentors and reached out to other people in the same situation and utilized that circle, because after those first 6 years, I was in some therapy for a while, trying to just recalibrate who I was and what I'm doing. Like, the business took me over. Like, that is the only thing that I existed for. So you can slip into that. I mean, I have a little different plan where I am 24/7 and I need a certain skill set to be able to put out on the road. So I wore many hats for many years, but utilizing other people's input and helping you balance that is definitely something I push you towards, because I wish I had that in those first few years.
When did you go through CPL?
2018. And I don't have a lot of ties to a lot of those people in that group because of the nature of my business, but honestly, that's an excuse. I'm a only child, type A, self-sufficient. I don't need somebody to validate me. I'm just of that mindset, but there are great resources in just talking to those people that have similar experiences. And it doesn't matter if they sell lunch, breakfast, or dinner, or t-shirts. We all have the same set of problems. It's just a different application. And once I realized that, I mean, it was like, you're not alone anymore.
yeah.
Because it really is isolating. It really is. And something my fiance and I get asked all the time, like, how did you figure out what you wanted to do? How did you decide this is the way to go? We are of that nature, of that type A, take charge, get it done. So we joke that it didn't matter what we were doing. If it wasn't this, we'd be selling rubber dog shit. Like, if you're of that, take charge, do it yourself, be your own boss, you'll make whatever idea you have happen if it's in you. So, like, I'm not passionate about traffic control and cones and plastic ones. It makes me money. I do well. I've built an avenue for my employees. I'd love to see them grow and get married, and buy houses and take vacations. Like, that's really the most gratifying thing to what I do, creating that avenue and being able to get up on Thursday and go, I'm not going until 10 o'clock today because I just, is really what the end result for me is, creating that freedom of choice. You know, so if you're the person that wants to be your own boss, get ready to buckle up. It's not easy, because if it was, this room would have about 30 times the amount of people in it, you know? So you're cut from a different cloth. If it's for you, you'll know right away, for sure. And every Monday I ask myself, how was I thinking? Just the same problems on repeat, but there is a lot of satisfying moments, you know, like when you sit down with your banker and he's asking you how much of an increase on your line of credit do you want? You know, it's like, well, if I can set my rate, we can talk. You know, those are those little bit of accomplishments over time that are just really gratifying, for sure. But it's in those first few years that, you know, turning on the lights before your crew gets in and making that pot of coffee and like standing back and realize like you've created that. everything after that just becomes noise in the day. So really focusing on what you have accomplished becomes really important, because as people that are self-driven, you're gonna always go, shit, I could have made more on that job. I could have done better on that choice. I should have fired that guy 3 months ago. Like, stick with your gut and don't second guess yourself, because you really do know what's right for you.
Yeah, positive feedback is hard to get. It's important. So I remember my early days, I don't know, once a year, for whatever reason, my parents would be around, but I'd say, God, come on, you go through the operation. You're the oh my cow, last year was this big, now it's this big. And I was like, yeah, I hadn't even thought about it. It's kind of when you're growing your business, kind of like watching your kids grow, right? You don't really notice that they're growing until you look at pictures from 5 years ago. So that was always something that struck me when somebody that hadn't been around for a long time came and saw, they remark, wow, this place is growing. Sorry, you had something.
Well, it's funny, to your point, that the continual need to learn, because what you learn, I had a debate with a buddy of mine who he claimed that the best way to learn how to run a business is to buy a business. And I said, I think the best way to learn about business is to start a business. Now, obviously, we're looking at two different spectrums, because he had a hell of a lot more money than me, so he could buy it. And I couldn't, so I had to start it. So, but I've grown the business to the point where we bought a business, and so I now have seen both sides of the coin, but they're two different skill sets. And so when you start, in my case, I started off with very little business knowledge. I mean, I went from college to 4 years working for a big corporation, and then I just started to start my own business, and it was bootstrapping to the nth degree. And I needed to then learn how to run a business, because to start a business is different than running a business. But if I spent a lot of time learning how to run an existing business, what was that going to do me when I'm trying to make ends meet on credit cards, right? So you really kind of learn these, and it depends on how you're starting your business. If you're truly bootstrapping, you're kind of guerrilla marketing, guerrilla everything. You're lean, mean kind of thing. And that's not the best way to run a business at a certain point. Like, you gotta hit a point where you gotta trust other people to run your shop, right? But that's not a skill set you learn when you're doing everything.
Right.
So to continually learn at the right time and be okay to know that you're not gonna let, you get the first sale, you get the second sale, you get through the first, you get through the second, you hire that person, et cetera, et cetera. Always gotta remember, there's still more to learn. And it's that early experience that can actually mess you up for when you need to know the different skill sets that you need when you're actually running. So just be aware, you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna be stupid again. And you spend your days being stupid. I mean, really, kind of honestly, you make mistakes constantly.
I think there's for my experience, I worked in restaurants forever. So, and you work with different bosses. Like, I went to Notre Dame, graduated in business management, worked for Taco Bell when I was part of PepsiCo. So big company, going through management. I worked at Disney World, different kinds of training programs, seeing that. And then I ended up working in New Orleans in small little restaurants and having different kind of bosses, different kind of systems, and just kind of soaking that in and making your own quilt, kind of like, okay, I like this piece, I like this piece, I like this piece. So when you had your own, and you develop those relationships to help you, those my old boss became, we became like sister restaurants. We closed for vacation, we put a sign up, go to Giacomo's and vice versa. And you get peers, in the business. They're your competitors, but more so they're your brothers and sisters, and you help each other that way. But learning, if you're thinking about doing something in a business, go get a job in it. Go find somebody in it and start to know it from the inside. And then you get a lot of insight on, what to do.
Yeah, there's something in my company that I haven't done or don't still do to this day. Most of the time I'm in work boots and a vest, and my guys see that. I mop the floors, I clean the toilets, I put out the cones, I answer the phones, I make the invoice. I don't think there's anything you can appreciate more amongst your people as having done that role yourself and being willing to step into it time to time. It builds a certain level of respect, and it opens your eyes to maybe some holes in your operation. You know, it makes you value that task again and see what they're up against. So I think that's a great point, wearing all hats.
I found it was fun too, after I did all the jobs, and then I hired more people, and they did the jobs, and after a few years, I found myself spending most of my days with accountants, lawyers, insurance agents, and
You want to get out.
I was no longer solving my customers' problems, and I wasn't having as much fun. And I made a decision that I would spend one day a month doing some job in my company. And man, it's fun. Those are the best days of the month for me. I'm gonna go down and pack orders in the warehouse today.
But the employee that gets to work with you, it's not fun for them. I mean, you're good, we're okay.
Yeah, so we had truck drivers, and I would ride with the truck driver, and they all smoke. I don't know if you know anything about truck drivers, but they all smoke. And I would let them smoke. Oh my God. this is great. No, please. Man, it's a long day. There's nowhere to go. You're the two of you in the truck for 10 hours. We had a question about what do I need before to get ready for a business plan? And I don't know if anybody's, my comment is there's templates. You can go online and buy a template or get a free template for constructing a business plan and start to do it on your own, and you'll see what kind of questions.
I might have one on my email. I have, from the Small Business Association, they sent me templates
Yeah,
that,
The bank likes their.
yeah. Okay.
Good to know.
yeah, so that's, you know, and then you can do a lot of it on your own. And when you get stumped, then you ask somebody for help.
But I think though, and I know I started this by saying I also didn't have a plan or business plan, but I am in marketing, and I would just say you need to be able to articulate what you're doing is the bottom line as succinctly, easy for me to say, as possible. It has to make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, it's not gonna make sense to anybody else. And this is where, you know, you pilot it with people in that inner circle too, and you test it out. Does it make sense to them? Because once it makes sense to you, does it make sense to somebody else? So I would say that the key is really, and so even though I didn't do a business plan at the start, I mean, I still have to go through the general exercise of what a business plan makes you do, and that's articulate what it is that you do, articulate where you want to go, how you're going to get there. And so I think those are like, even if you just start there, that'll also lead you down a path of what am I missing? Or what do I need to add here? Oh yeah, and I probably do want to hire somebody in this role by this time. And how am I going to support that? You know, so I think really sitting with yourself and being able to articulate that vision can really help you at least the starting point, because then, and I think Nicole said it, you might do that plan and then you kind of, you get your funding or your approval and you put it aside, and then you don't really use it as a day-to-day operating guide. But then what'll happen is, at least I'll tell you 10 years in for me, I then realized, okay, so we grew and great, but now what, right? And oh crap, I need to probably streamline some things. Maybe I need to reorganize some things a little bit. So now I'm articulating to myself a different type of vision. I mentioned point A to point B, and now to point C, and then eventually point D. So articulating to myself, how am I going to get there? And if that means restructuring the company, if that means thinking about diversifying our revenue stream, if that means investing in more of a service line over another one, those are all things that I'm now kind of looking at. So I would say that articulation to yourself of that vision never really ends. The business plan is just kind of that starting seed point, you know, at the journey, at the starting point of where you guys are at right now.
Last question is from Mr.
I just
Wall.
had a quick question. When it comes to forming your corporations, did you all start as like sole proprietors and then transfer over to a S or a C or an LLC, or did you jump right in and do the something else? You know, or what parameters
go into making that decision?
I think it kind of depends on what type of business you're in and what suits you better, but for me, given my liability, I went right into an S corp and everything funnels down to me personally. So I mean, I really think it kind of, and you might change it over time as you grow and change. I think you gotta look into what are those different options, what does it cover you for? You know, and sit with your accountant and decide. That's how I decided to sit down with my accountant and said, so I'm looking to do, what makes most sense for you. And it's sometimes it's a financial decision too, you know, it's more to incorporate versus doing business as. So it's kind of what fits you in your plan.
Having a good accountant is the best.
Yes.
Like I had the same accountant, my accountant's in New Orleans, and he just retired, he's like 85, and he just stopped doing returns because of all the changes in COVID. I'm like, are you kidding me? But literally like walking me through it, like he knew about restaurants. So he was very like, no, you don't want to do this, and just, you need to get it explained to you. You know, why, like we're in an LLC, always have been, but you know, how like the taxes work, you get taxed on the flow of money, which changes some businesses other than other business. That's a big thing for restaurants. You now want to get taxed on the flow of money versus liability problems. You know, what state are you in? What are the insurance laws? You know, there's no dram shop in New Orleans. So I didn't have to really worry too much about like liquor liability. Oh, but then you just do this and get this insurance. But you know, if you have a, you know, he set my company up and did my returns for, I don't know, 23 years. You know, so getting that kind of, you know, when you have even when you have something come up during the year and you're thinking about doing something before you purchase versus lease versus whatever, just to have that someone you call up and just say, hey, you know, how should I make this entry in the accounting program? Well, why are you doing that? Okay. Yeah. These things you really need, you know, when you first start, just someone you can trust and someone that you're not afraid to call and bounce the expertise, someone who's dealt with the IRS. So I got a full-blown audit, you know, and I'm like, you know, I call him up, oh my God, he's like, sit tight, you know, it was all fine, it all went fine. But you need somebody to give you that.
So last month, we had a speaker talked about 5 legal mistakes startups make. And really impressed upon us, I think everybody was here, that it's really important to get good legal counsel and good accounting counsel. And I think what we're planning for next month is a similar program. What are 5 common accounting mistakes or bookkeeping mistakes that startups make? So we just knew we'll do that, what that might look like last month, but that's a good question. And last month, the lawyer talked about a company that planned to go public from the get-go. It granted their employees stock options and got them to work for a lower rate of pay in return for getting stock options. So when they went public, or when somebody told the company, they'd make a lot of money on their stock options. However, they Googled the format to use for a stock option. It was just total bullshit. Right? So when the company bought, well, the company's lawyers looked at the corporate structure and they said, well, what are these stock options? These aren't really stock options.
Oh my God.
And the deal fell through, the employees didn't get their money, and it's just mess. So it's really, one of the things that most entrepreneurs don't think through is what's your exit strategy? How are you going to get out of this business? What are you going to do? Are you going to leave it to your kids? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to just close it? I mean, you really need to start with that. What's the exit strategy? What am I going to do here to wind this thing down? And that's an important question to ask. But being involved in an incubator like this or getting advice from the Small Business Development Center are really good places to go to get those kinds of questions answered. And it's important to get good accounting advice, and good legal advice, and you don't really have to pay a lot of money for it. You should pay a lot of money for it if you do it. So with that, we're a little over time. I think this has been great. Thank you very much to the 4 panelists.